True Horror is a choose-your-own-path horror audio game and is available on the Apple and Android store. By purchasing the app, you get the full exclusive game with 10 choose-your-own-path horror audio stories. With your support, you can help me turn it into a series. Now enjoy the show. Hey friends, I shall be gone this week for a wedding, but in my stead I will be featuring some of my favorite lesser-known narrators. Please show them your love and support, and I shall see you all next week.
One cloudy afternoon, when my brother and I were very young, about 6 and 7 years old, we were at our grandmother's house. After a light rain and a fairly heavy wind, our grandmother was away and we had the backyard to ourselves. It was fairly large, had rocks of all types, and large trees. It was a very cool-looking place to explore. We noticed these odd pinkish-gray worms. Some had fallen out of the Palo Verde tree. These worms, Vuvelzila-shaped, with sharp teeth, were in trees and crushed under rocks. We noticed about 3 to 4 of these worms dead and flat under the tree. We poked them with a stick, and one made a weird sound, sort of like the sound a barely inflated balloon makes if popped. They had cartoonish, evil, paper-thin teeth. These creatures looked vile. Their body made no logical sense as to how they would function. We even showed them to our grandmother when she returned. After a day, they had crumpled up like wet paper, and there was nothing left of them. I still wonder what they were. I also wonder, could they fly? How did they get in that tree to fall out of it? I almost wish I could see them again. Somehow, we brushed it all off and never mentioned them again until 2009, 2 years after our grandmother's death. I am now 15 and recall the whole day fairly well, though my brother claims some of what I remember isn't true. Has anyone else seen something like them? I used to work at a cheese factory on the edge of a cornfield in southwestern Minnesota. There were a series of days in the summer of '04 where it was so hot that the milk being delivered to us in trucks would evaporate before we got it. It made work easy. The dearth of milk denied us any actual labor, but management wouldn't let us not come to work, so we would show up and mess around all shift. I was working nights at the time. It was 2 or 3 a.m., and I was out on the loading dock watching bats fly around the floodlights, because I liked being out in the cool night air. The corn was as high as my shoulder, so about 5'10". As I was watching the bats, I looked down at the edge of the cornfield. Something was moving there. It was the size of a small child, and very, very skinny. Pale, with something that looked like a head of straight black hair. It moved in a sort of jerky gait, like someone dancing the robot badly. It moved in chunks. Legs, then hips, then torso, shoulders, neck, and finally head. It was looking back into the cornfield, or at least I felt like it was. I felt prickly all over. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a heron or something at first, but it looked too much like a person. It didn't move like a person, though. Gradually, step by step, it moved towards me. Letting my curiosity better my fear, I moved towards the edge of the dock, which was raised a few feet off the ground to connect with semis. When I got within a few feet of the edge, the thing looked at me. I was paralyzed. I could have run, but I was stuck somewhere between terrified and intrigued. It moved, Its face still pointed at me. It ratcheted its body in that disconcerting, jerky movement toward the cornfield and went into it. I tried to watch where the field moved as it passed, but the corn remained perfectly still. I noticed that all of the crickets were silent. After a few minutes, nothing happened. I stood out there for an hour, but it never came back. I never saw it again. My story takes place in 2000. I was riding to high school with a friend in Cheshire, Massachusetts. We drove past the school and pulled into a driveway to turn around, when a creature ran out of the woods and just stood there and stared at us for about 5 minutes. It looked a lot like a lemur, with a long, skinny, striped tail that it held straight up. It had a face that I would describe as a cross between an armadillo and a wild boar, yet smaller in size, if you can imagine that. It creeped me out even more than the lemur-like body. However, the creepiest part of the creature's face was its visible teeth. It had bottom fangs that must have been 4 to 5 inches long and curved upwards towards its creepy, squinted eyes. I don't know what more to say, except that the creature's face looked evil. It did not have a normal animal expression. It was looking straight at us, and we felt lucky to be in the car because it looked menacing. If anyone knows anything about the strange creature that we described, please comment. The creature I saw stood there until we began to back out of the driveway. Then it turned and ran back into the woods. However, it repeatedly looked back over its shoulder at us, until finally disappearing into the woods. I have never seen a creature like this before, or since, but I sure wish I knew what it was that I saw. One Saturday in 2008, I had the strangest encounter of my life. My cousin Anne and I were exploring the woods of Turner, Maine. My grandma always told me of the tree people she saw there as a child. I had never seen or heard them since I've lived in Maine, so I was very skeptical that they live. My iPod was stuffed in my pocket, and Anne was studying everything we passed. She believed all Grandma's stories. We came to an orange fence in the middle of the woods. The funny thing is, we own all this land. Mom and Dad would have heard about this. "Come on, let's jump over it," exclaimed Anne. She was overexcited. I sighed, but we made our way over the fence. As soon as we were over it, I felt like someone was following us. The hair on my back was standing up, and I didn't know why. I turned around to look back, but no one was there. Anne seemed fine, like she went here all the time. We were so far from that fence, my comfort zone. At one time, I was sure I saw 2 yellow-orange eyes, just like the color of the fence. Creepy. Suddenly, Anne yelped, "What the hell is that?" I turned and saw a skinny, slimy, brown creature staring at us. It had the same eyes that I'd seen earlier. It reminded me of a walking piece of bark. I was frozen. This thing made the hair on my head stand up. It made an awful scream that made my eardrums burst. I couldn't hear a thing for 5 minutes. The bark creature ran at such a speed that it was just a brown blur. Anne and I just stood there in shock. We made a beeline for the house. The next evening we went out again, but the orange-yellow fence was gone. The questions were ringing in my head. Had we really encountered the dwelling tree people? Where could that giant fence have gone? I knew I wasn't dreaming, because Anne remembers it too. I'll never venture that far into the woods again. Do so-called hellhounds really exist? Where do they come from? And what would you do if you were being chased by one? It was about 4 or 5 years ago. I am 13 now. I lived in Modesto, California at the time. I moved away a year or so after this phenomenon. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a dark and gloomy night. My mom had just told my 2 sisters and me to get the mail. The mailbox was 50 or so feet away from our 1-story house, but I didn't really mind it. My sisters and I walked to the mailbox with ease. We got the mail and started our walk back home. As we started back to our house, we heard faint growling noises. Maybe it was our stomachs or one of our neighbor's dogs that heard our footsteps. We ignored it and kept on walking. We started hearing it louder and louder now. We all looked back, and what we saw behind us was terrifying. A pure black dog with gleaming red eyes, almost like a Rottweiler, but more demonic. We started walking faster, and that thing was right behind us. We started sprinting, and the dog did the same. It started barking at us as we ran in a full sprint in sheer terror. We got back to our house, and the porch light was on. We all turned back, and what we saw behind us was shocking. Nothing was there. The dog vanished, as if it was never there. My sisters and I looked all around the street for a sign of the dog. He had vanished into thin air. I am not crazy, nor are my sisters. It was not a dream. I remember it vividly like it was yesterday. We all ran into the house panting. We told our mom about our encounter with this dog. She, of course, did not believe us. We never saw that thing ever again. This event happened when I was a boy in Scottsdale, Arizona. It would have been around 1990, in the summer, July or August. I woke up to hear my mom screaming. Sleeping next to her, I woke up as well and saw her shouting and pointing at a figure across the room. Everything was dark, but the hall light was on, and the bedroom door was open, allowing some of the light in. The figure crouched on all fours on top of a dresser and was looking at her. When it saw me looking at it, it turned its head and looked right at me. It then jumped off the dresser and seemed to run out the open door, but it moved in a blur and was far too fast for a person. It dissolved when it hit the light. There was a feeling of great terror when it saw me. My mom and I talk about the incident occasionally, but she rarely discusses it since she is very religious. I am not, and thinks it had something to do with something evil. I've seen things similar to this since then, into my adult life, always preempted by feelings of being watched by some malevolent, stark-raving terror, and the urge to run and turn on the light. I saw it manifest in the daylight when I was a teenager, after waking up from a terrible nightmare. The entity struck the glass door near the couch where I slept, had its arms and legs spread before it darted away in a blur, and faded like it did before. This incident isn't as credible as the previous encounter, since there were no other witnesses this time. It remains one of the most unexplained and truly horrific events of my life. We have lived in a haunted house for over 25 years. Maybe living with ghosts for that long opens parts of your mind to experiences that would normally be closed off. Just a thought. My wife and I were coming home late from dinner and drinks at a friend's house. We were in the country outside of Union, Missouri. On the south side of Union, there was an antique bridge that was scary to cross because it was so narrow and had a sharp turn at one end. After the bridge, the road went through a huge field that at the time was under cultivation. Well, I had to go to the bathroom in the worst way because of all the beer I drank. My wife said, "Let me get down to that field." There was an old shed right in the middle, and you can squat down by that shed. She stopped the car right in the road because it was late and so very dark. I got out and started to walk towards the shed, which was only a couple of feet off the road. Suddenly, I saw something, and it didn't register right away. It took me a couple of seconds to realize what it was. It was two eyes. Two big, really red, glowing eyes. They were looking right at me. I turned to see my wife looking over her shoulder at it too. It's kind of funny now, but neither one of us said a word. I turned and jumped back in the car, and we took off. Later, my wife asked me what kind of animal I thought it was. I'm an old country boy, and I've never seen eyes shine like that before. Those eyes were big, high, and so very red. The bridge has since been replaced with a new one, but the old shed is still there. Believe it or not, I still speed up when I go by it, because I'm still creeped out by what I saw all those years before. Two years ago in Janesville, Minnesota, in November during first deer season, I went out and sat in a tree stand in the early morning with my shotgun. I had heard growling and large footsteps. I thought it was a large coyote, but then it came out into the clearing, and it was 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and dark brown, almost black, like a large dog, only its front paws were almost hands, and its tail was long like a cat's tail, 3 feet long. As it growled, I could see its teeth. They were almost the size of my shotgun shells, 2.5 inches. I watched it come my way, and I realized that it was following my scent. I, being scared and not wanting to die, raised my gun and pushed the safety forward. When it clicked, the animal looked straight at me and started to go right towards the tree I was in. I shot 3 times. The first 2 hit a tree behind it, but the third hit it in the chest, as far as I could tell. All it did was stumble, then turn and run to thick brush nearby. I was so scared that it might still be out there that I stayed in the stand for 3 hours. At noon or so, I decided to make a run to the truck. When I got to where it had been hit, I only found a little blood. Like the bullet didn't go through the skin. The blood stunk and was dark, so red it was almost black. I ran to my truck. Later that year, when I was trapping, I saw its tracks next to a destroyed trap set, and a bunch of blood and fur from a raccoon, from what I could tell. I have never gone back to those woods. This happened to me and my grandpa on a hunting trip in July 2008. I don't see my grandpa very often, so I always take the chance to take trips with him. Grandpa is pretty much an outdoorsman and enjoys hunting, fishing, and just being out in nature. Grandpa and I were out in the woods. It was around 3 to 3:30 on Friday, the 25th of July. I was 18 at the time. We were on Grandpa's land in Georgia. It's a pretty place, with the typical Georgia woodland and a few grassy plains. We were walking on a little rocky road heading for a site where Grandpa often sees deer. As normal, there were a lot of sounds going on at night in the woods. We ignored most of them and remained quiet as to not scare anything away. Suddenly, we heard an unusual noise that we had never heard before on any of our many hunting trips. Grandpa looked at me and listened. Then he raised his finger in front of his mouth to show me that we wouldn't make any more movements. I heard a lot of movement and more of the noise. I can't really describe the sounds, but I sure can describe what I saw, even though it was pretty dark. We just kept listening to the sounds, as suddenly something came walking slowly out of the bushes and onto the road maybe 150 yards in front of us. My eyes got really big, and at that moment I wasn't even scared, just amazed to see this creature. We didn't move. As crazy as it sounds, it looked just like a raptor from the popular Jurassic Park movies. I just froze, because I thought things like that lived many thousands of years ago. It had a long, stiff tail, walked on 2 feet, and had short arms. It looked lizard-like, and had a huge claw on both of its feet and smaller claws on its arms. Since the creature appeared to us that it could run fast, we decided to just not move at all. It raised its head, and it seemed like it was smelling the air. I estimate its height around 5 feet at the shoulders. After sniffing the air, it made those sounds again, and turned around and ran off in the bushes. Grandpa and I waited until we felt safe again, and then quietly made our way back to the truck and drove home. In the truck, we talked to each other about what we had just seen, and decided to not tell it to Grandma, because she would think we were crazy. I never believed in stuff like ghosts and creatures and paranormal stuff, and I still don't believe in ghosts. But since that encounter, I believe in creatures that science doesn't know about. That's my story, as odd as it sounds. I know what I saw. About 3 years ago, I was driving to my dad's house from across state in Pennsylvania. He lived far out in the country, down a desolate paved road that crossed with an old dirt road, as well as some unused railroad tracks. The entire area was surrounded by deep woods and unused farming fields. There were a couple of dilapidated old houses, an old well, and a few old cemeteries nearby. I arrived at those crossroads I mentioned earlier after being on the road for about 4 hours. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. by this point, and I decided to pull over and relieve myself. I stopped my truck about 60 feet from said crossroad, close to a small farm shed with some old equipment in it. There was a single light bulb on the side of the shed, providing the only source of light in the nearby pitch-black darkness of the night. On the opposite side of the road from the shed was a steep drop-off into a ditch, on the other side of which were some dense woods. As I was relieving myself in the dark by the shed, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a massive feeling of dread, like someone had just punched me directly in the gut. I had been around these woods all my life, and used to walk around the area at night as a teenager, and I assure you that I had never felt so scared as I did at that exact moment. I quickly finished up, and goaded by my sudden sense of panic, ran back to my truck, got in, and locked the doors. I flicked the headlights on and cranked the engine so badly that you could hear the gears grinding, but all I cared about was getting out of there. As soon as I began to turn back onto the road from the shoulder, my headlights shone over the ditch and picked something up on the other side of the road, about a foot from the asphalt. My stomach immediately sank again. There was something crawling out of the ditch on all fours. It was hunkered down like an animal, but its body looked almost human, albeit a human that was attempting to mimic a stalking animal. It didn't look hairy, but it was a uniform color, almost dun yellow, not yellow like a cougar or lion, but a sickly yellow that reminded me of jaundiced skin. Its head was shaped like an oval, but had no hair or ears that I could see. The mouth was very, very wide, and looked like a thin, straight line that extended all the way across the creature's face. It was very, very slightly upturned at the edges, like a slight smile. The eyes were very small and beady, just like two black pinpoints. It had no nose or any facial features aside from the mouth and eyes. Since I was around 7 feet from it, I'm certain it wasn't just a person wearing a mask. Even the body sort of seemed wrong, but I can't pinpoint why. I couldn't see feet or hands, since there was about a foot of grass at the edge of the road. Whatever it was, I'd say it was about the size of a 12-year-old. As soon as my lights hit it, I could tell by its movements that it had been in the process of slowly creeping up the ditch to the road, and when my lights hit it, it sort of retracted slightly, like it was surprised that it had been discovered. I didn't stick around long enough to see what was going to go down next. I floored the gas and flew all the way to my dad's house and stayed up the entire night freaked out. The part of this experience that still utterly scares me to this day is that whatever I saw was definitely stalking up that ditch to get me when I had my back turned to it. Otherwise, I can't possibly explain what had triggered those emotions when I stood there in the darkness with my guard completely down. The only thing that came close to that sudden realization of grave danger was when I was nearly struck by a speeding car on a city street many years ago. I don't know what could have happened if I lingered around for a few minutes longer, but I'd rather not think about it. I used to live in a house that backs up to a big public open space where there are hiking trails. Lots of joggers and people walking their dogs. Anyway, one night, I had a kind of creepy dream that an old lady came into my room and was trying to get me to come outside. The dream woke me up, so I got some water and turned off my fan because it was cold, and then I fell asleep again. I went right back into the same dream with this old lady coming into my room and calmly saying, "You have to go outside now." I kept telling her no, that it was too cold. I woke up again, and my fan was on. I figured I must have just thought I turned it off, or the button got stuck. So I got up, turned the fan off again, and went back to sleep. This time, I had the same exact dream, except she was much older looking in this one, and was really agitated. She was yelling, "Go outside! You must go outside!" I got up in the dream, and followed her to the hallway. When I got to the hallway, she wasn't there, and then I woke up, and I was actually standing in the hallway. I have never, ever walked around in my sleep before or after this. Also, my fan was on when I went back to my room. At this point, I was freaked out, so I got something to eat and watched TV for a couple of hours. I went back to bed around 5 or 6, and the dream didn't come back. The messed up part is, a couple of days later, I saw that there were police cars in the open space, and when I asked my mom what happened, she said they had found an older woman who was reported missing a few days before. She must have had a heart attack or a stroke or something on the trail by my house, and they had found the body. My boyfriend lives in a Civil War-era plantation home on a huge farm. The place has a weird vibe to it. None of the animals will come upstairs. If you bring them up, they will start shaking and dart back downstairs. My boyfriend won't even go in one of the bedrooms. Slave shackles are still hanging up in the basement. The place has apparently been pretty dormant as far as paranormal activity goes for the past year. I've had a couple odd experiences. My boyfriend says that it always gets more active around the holidays, though. In November, right before Thanksgiving, I was staying the night with him. I was about to fall asleep, and I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the pack of coyotes that roam around the back of the farm, but I heard it again a few seconds after the first time, and it was definitely not a coyote. I immediately woke up and was aware of my surroundings, and I heard it again. It was a woman outside, calling for a man named John. She sounded so panicked and distressed. I heard her call a few more times, and I could hear the voice moving around the yard. I was creeped out, but I cuddled up to my boyfriend and went back to sleep. When I told him about it in the morning, he said, "That's a new one." Fast forward to exactly a month from my experience. I wake up, and the first thing out of my boyfriend's mouth is, "Remember a couple weeks ago, you heard a woman outside calling for someone? What name was it?" "John," I said. "I heard it last night," he replied. I set a reminder on my phone for the next month, but nothing happened. Really eerie. I've been trying to find out the history of the house to find out if a John ever lived there. I lived in a weird house as a kid, which resulted in chairs being moved in other rooms when I was the only one home, kitchen cupboards opening late at night when no one else was awake. I could be sitting at the computer in a lit room at night and watch as a black cloud would float through a closed door and sit, suspended in the air, across the room from me. I had footsteps that would walk outside my door and loud breathing. I was so terrified as a child that I ended up sleeping with music playing so I could tune out the noises. I still, to this day, cannot sleep without music playing. I probably could have convinced myself that most of it wasn't real as I aged, if it wasn't for a certain weird happening. It was about 11 a.m. in the morning, and my younger brother and I were waiting at home while my mother was out doing jobs. We were waiting for her to come back to pick us up, so we were sitting by the front window watching for her car, and then we heard the radio playing from my brother's room. We both didn't understand why it was on all of a sudden, so we walked to my brother's room. My brother hid behind me, and I had to walk in the room first, and the second I crossed the threshold, the radio went silent. Upon closer inspection, we realized it wasn't even plugged in, and there were no batteries in the back of it. There was no logical explanation for it to be playing, and my brother, a young boy, had a bunch of Matchbox cars and an old car playmat, and he swore and declared that he had parked the cars neatly on it, in lines. But when we went in there, the cars were thrown all over the room. Luckily, we moved out of that house, but my brother and I still remember the radio saga clearly to this day, and it's pretty much the only reason I know I wasn't completely crazy as a child. Before my girlfriend and I moved in together, my girlfriend lived alone in the house she owned. During the course of us dating and me spending the night, she finally explained some of the weird stuff going on in her home. Weird banging sounds happening at all hours. Other weird sounds. Seeing things from the corner of your eye. There were even a couple of times where we saw something walking around the house. She described it as being a robed figure, almost like the Grim Reaper. There was also the feeling that something was watching you from behind. You know, that same feeling that causes the hairs on the back of your neck to stand on end. But the worst was this constant foreboding feeling coming from one of the unused bedrooms. These happenings scared her so much, simply explaining it caused her to start crying. Now, I'm a skeptic about these things. I'm that guy that would watch all of those paranormal shows and find the logical reasoning for things happening. Since we were just dating at the time, and I really liked her, I wanted to show her my bravado and my lack of fear for the thing in the room. Get out of this house, you fucking asshole. I command you to get out of this house, I yelled into the room. Do not bother her again, you hear me? Or you'll have to deal with me. You do not want to fuck with me. Big mistake. Really big mistake. I spent that night at my girlfriend's. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up to a night terror. I had had them a couple of times before. I didn't experience anything crazy, but this instance felt intentional. It felt like I had poked a bear, and it wanted to show me that it didn't want to be messed with. I woke up to being paralyzed, heart throbbing, being able to see and hear what was around you. I could feel my girlfriend lying down next to me, and I could hear her breathing. This wasn't the scary part, though. The scariest part was hearing. Yes, hearing. Something run out of the room and down the stairs away from me and towards the unused bedroom. I could hear it make its way through the house. I desperately tried to get out of this night terror. I tried telling myself it was just a dream. I tried praying. I desperately tried to call out my girlfriend's name. I knew it was a night terror, but still couldn't get out of it. Every time before, I could get out of a night terror by reminding myself what it was. She somehow heard my whispered calls and woke me up. I did not go back to sleep that night. I used to live in Orlando, in a somewhat shady part of town. The 5 deadbolts on the apartment door should have raised some flags. But I was a student, and there were a lot of students in the area, and I was young and not yet wary. Our less nice part of town bordered on a very nice part of town. There was a 4 to 6 lane road that ran through the area, and a jogging path that ran alongside of it. Our apartment complex was right next to the road and the trail, and a little further down was my local gas station where I would walk once a day to buy cigarettes and other things. Because of the layout, it was easy for me to walk out my door, step on the path, and walk the 10 minutes to the gas station. Walking through the complex took longer. I often ended up taking this walk at night. Sure, I was a girl walking alone, but the path bordered this huge road with a lot of traffic, and right across the street was a busy strip mall with fast food places and such, so it wasn't like a dark path in the woods or anything. And hey, I always brought pepper spray, paid attention to my surroundings, etc. So one night, I head to the gas station around 11 p.m. As I'm walking along the path, I hear something behind me. Turning around, I notice, about 30 yards behind me, there's a car on the trail. Like it had to have pulled off of the road and pulled up onto the path. I'm stopped and staring, and the guy gets out of the driver's side and starts walking around the grass between the trail and the road, as though he's looking for something. Oh, I think, something must have fallen out of his car and he's pulled over to search for it. I keep walking. As I'm walking, I'm hearing something again behind me. I stop and turn. The guy is now 15 yards behind, still no headlights. And I turn as he stops the car, or he stops the car as I turn. Again, he gets out, and it looks like he's searching for something in the grass. But he's closer now, and I'm a little creeped out. I'm not close enough to the gas station, so I pick up the pace. The next time I turn, he's even closer. He stops again when I look, but he doesn't get out of the car now. I don't want to just take off to let him know that he scared me, but I am now power walking. My pepper spray is in my hand, but what does pepper spray do against a car? I throw a look over my shoulder, and he's only a few yards behind me. He doesn't stop this time. The distance is closing. I take off. I judge the distance to the gas station to be too far along the trail, but there's some trees and stuff on the other side of the path from the road, so I bolt into them, through them, and through a little ditch towards the light of the station, which is now right in front of me. It felt like the dude in the car was going fast. I look behind me as I'm running through the ditch, and I see him through the space in the trees. His car slows down and he's just cruising along the section of the path I left. I continue my sprint to the gas station, where I know I'll feel safe. The owners and employees all know me. I make it out front, and I'm catching my breath, watching the part of the jogging path that meets the intersection. I see the car clearly for the first time. It's one of those brown car-truck combos with a tan stripe on the side. The guy drives up the trail to the intersection, flips his lights on, and floors it onto the main road, disappearing. Up until that point, I was running on a mix of adrenaline and feeling that maybe I'm being stupid but better play safe than sorry feeling. Once I had made it inside the station, I pretty much broke down shaking. To this day, I still don't know what that guy's intentions were. Maybe he didn't even see me and was just looking for something. Maybe he was planning to hit me with his car and drag me off. Maybe he was an asshole that was just trying to scare me. Either way, I had my boyfriend come get me from the gas station, and I've never walked alone at night again. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we'd gotten into a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So, this afternoon, I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays. meaning he'd surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight, and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed. It was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight, and didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting for 24 hours, huh?" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom, his sister, the landlady? For some reason I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister, so I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There is a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up, and I asked him if his mom or sister might come over unannounced. He told me, "No, don't move. I'm calling the police." The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird though. Nothing was missing from the apartment, despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have something to tell you, but don't freak out." He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months, and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment, but doesn't touch or take anything valuable, not even the money jar sitting right in the entrance. Takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and immediately leaves. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day. I hope I never do.